why am I giving this talk? To emphasize the significant role consensus standards play in opening up new markets, battle naysayers of a new technology, and to be able to give a good run for the enormous potential of something like optical fiber sensing. When we work with optical fiber sensing, there are some issues. So all of these have to be covered in the standards, and that is the driver. Thermal stress on sensing elements, mechanical and thermal impacts during operation, sensor behavior and aging under maintained vibration, under wet conditions, creep, drift of the sensor signal, and durability of materials under thermal, chemical, mechanical conditions. So that demands us to do extra work by writing consensus standards addressing every one of these points plus more. Next slide, please. The pioneering efforts produced the first version of IEC, Electrotechnical Society, in 1995. Then the German document became a very specific optic gyroscope standard for the world out of Germany. Then IEC went back to the original generic specifications and released in 2012. Next slide, please. So to sum, there has been a fairly heavy German influence in the IEC standards that we have in our hands. So it evolved into C-form and then distributed temperature sensing publication that came out 2010 and the final version in 2016. Next slide, please. The latest version of the organization of the standards as generic, sectional, family, and product and detail specifications, what are under preparation, what has been done, and what are under consideration are shown in this chart. Next slide, please. The earlier slide applies to strain effects. This applies to temperature measurements. Very similar chart, a guidance or pathway to keep everything organized in our work. Next slide, please. Then, depending on the type of sensing, FPG, distributed, polarized, Fabry-Perret, we have different codes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, heavy German influence, and you know how Germans think. They think in a very organized, systematic, very rigid way. So IEC has inherited that from the composition of the committee worldwide. Next slide, please. I came across a thesis by Dr. Michael Eiten in Switzerland while I returned as the chairman of an ASTM committee that used to write and publish ASTM standards on how to install last mile fiber optic cables in existing sewers, natural gas lines, and water lines. After 6 years, I burnt out. From 2001 to 2006, I said goodbye to my friends and said, I don't want to have anything to do with you all. I'm burnt out. I'm going to take care of my son who is ill. And for 6 years, I stayed the hell away from my friends. But the committee plunged from 350 down to 50 people. They have turned the committee into a do-nothing social club. My heart was bleeding. So I came back when they asked me, and I said, what do I have to do to get the people back into my camp? And I happened to run across on the internet the thesis by innovative solutions for geotechnical structural problems by Michael Eiten. So I read the thesis in the Hyatt Hotel in New Orleans before I went into the meeting to chair the meeting of ASCMF 36, and I called him, and he answered. And I said, can you help me to write a series of standards? And I said, in what? And I gave him a thumbnail sketch of what I had as my vision. He said yes. And we essentially started the global OFSS group as a two-person band. And it took us 6 months before we recruited the third and the fourth one. Then we got the idea, because of the distance across the world, we don't have the money to meet physically. So I hosted 46 monthly telephone calls, 20 to 25 minutes, every first month, Wednesday, 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time. It worked. We wrote and reviewed and balloted with a lot of negativity in the committee of people who were very jealous, who haven't done anything for 6 to 8 years, and we published 2 standards. Again, give me your card. I will send you a copy of those 2 standards, managing optical fiber sensing systems. And those are the 3079 and 3092. The real motivation for me was not just the committee dying, rejuvenate. I was a consultant to the tunnel project in Washington, D.C. I could not convince them that it is time for them to abandon the old-fashioned strain gauging, radios on. There is a thing called optical fiber sensing that has been applied by people from Cambridge and similar institutions around the world and have had very good success. Are there any standards? The first question they asked. And I said, give me 5 months, there will be. And we went to work and rolled out the standards. Next slide, please. ISHME is a major organization primarily from the structural engineering point of view. So they have level 1, level 2, level 3 standards. How much time do I have? Amazing. Okay. Standards. I don't have time to read. Next slide, please. CSIC has written a number of guides, and I bet they will keep writing guides and publish through ICE. So we cannot forget about their contribution. Next slide, please. We have been planning to write 6 new standards, and they are in various stages. One on installation of optical fiber cables along pipelines for leak detection using vibration, strain, and thermal sensing. Next slide, please. Daniel Inardi, he will be here at the meeting that we are holding at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday at the end of the conference. For above ground pipelines, this is pretty much done in the final draft form in his hands and his committee. Next slide, please. This is in bits and pieces across the ocean for fiber brag grading applications, for civil engineering applications. Next slide, please. This is from Cambridge people, and Hisham Mohammed is a Cambridge graduate. So he went, picked up and moved back to the University of Malaysia, but he's still doing what he started in the hands of the Cambridge teachers. Next slide, please. Nils Noether is a brilliant man from Berlin who invents the interrogators, and his work is fairly well into what we need to turn it into a standard. Those are our future plans, and we have been working on those. Next slide, please. Then one more project from Phil Keenan and Cedric Echawasi from the Cambridge group with Atkins to detect illegal tapping of sewer lines using fiber optic sensing. People tell me who follow me that I'm always doing something, and this is so true. I ended up being the guest editor of 20 papers for the Southeast Asian Geotechnical Society. They had no interest in optical fiber sensing. Well, I took time to massage them so that they become excited about optical fiber sensing. And I have the kind of magic powder in my hand. So they asked me to go ahead, and within 5 months, we produced the manuscripts for this volume. And if you come for the optical fiber sensing systems group, 1 hour-long meeting at 12:30 on Wednesday, I may surprise you by giving you a gift for coming and honoring us. That's a secret. Or otherwise, I can give you an e-copy, or you could join the society and download all you can eat. You can do it on your own. Next slide, please. Benefits of global standards. These standards reduce the time it takes engineers to write bid documents and technical. It's very boring to write the same sort of document for bidding jobs over and over again. So let's do it within the standard and then refer to the standard. And it brings added comfort to engineers, contractors, and users. Standards help to form contracts, legal contracts between buyers and sellers. If there are disagreements, when you go in front of a judge, the judge will ask you what standards are in the literature that he could refer to decide in a just way the dispute's outcome. The biggest benefit of global standards is that these consensus documents pave the way to new technologies to become more widely accepted in the marketplace. So it's a worthy pursuit. People think standards, if you are in the standards writing business, people are going to think that you are not creative, you are not researchy, you are not smart. None of that is true. Try and write a standard and ballot it until your last breath. You will have a feel for how complicated writing and publishing standards are. It typically takes 10 years. And I suffered a lot by trying to push these through in 5 months apiece. And I had good soldiers as the technical contact of those working groups. Next slide, please. The conclusions I can draw before the axe falls on my timing. Standardization activities to provide fiber optic sensors use have been strongly pushed in the last decade. The IEC standards is controlled by one writer, Wolfgang Habel. When I started my group with Michael Ayton, he declared a war. He sent me an email saying, I don't know who you are, I have never heard of you, but don't do what you have announced that you will do. You are barging into my territory. So I had to spend an enormous amount of energy to cultivate him as a friend. It worked because I added them as a carbon copy to everything we were doing secretly in our standard. Now he visits my house and I go to see him. And we are co-authors. So any adverse relationship has to be turned into a positive one if you want to contribute in the standard writing business. Continued close cooperation between experts of all these organizations should be encouraged. If terminologies conflict between one group the other, you are doomed. The judge will look at it and say, what do you guys mean you have standards? You cannot even agree on basic terms. We will look like fools. Next slide, please. Thank God, this is the last slide. No single group can meet the growing demands. Problems experienced within ASTM, we cannot afford. The geotextile industry and the oil and gas industry have developed their own institute that stand on their own feet and publish their own standards. This is what we are thinking of doing. We will decide at the meeting. Voting members of technical committees within SDO must meet requirements of technical training. The ASTM system is a joke. The people who have a background in insurance sales could vote on medical devices to save a patient from a heart problem. It is that bad. And I had members who were deliberate about stopping us going any further, kept voting negative over and over again. And their backgrounds were business degrees, insurance sales degrees, political history, have nothing to do with what we are trying to accomplish. That is my quick message. And you talk to me when you have time, one-on-one. Thank you so much.